Welcome to the room. We're doing a show today with Falstaff and friends. Before we get started, have everyone introduce themselves and start with you, Natania.
Hi, I'm Natania Barron. I'm a fantasy author. I have been writing and publishing for about 10 years now, a little bit more than that. And my most recent novel is an Arthurian retelling, feminist story of Anna Pendragon, the sister of King Arthur, called Queen of None. And all of my stories, as well as my own life, are quite queer.
All right, perfect. Jaym.
I'm Jaym Gates. I actually was one of the people who founded Falstaff with John. It came out of us sitting in Amelie's Bakery with Jay Ricard very late one evening and talking about how we weren't really seeing a lot of the stories that we wanted to see. So I'm really happy that I got to help bring a lot of queer stories to life, especially as I am queer and I finally have a place to really feel like we're seeing some more of that representation. I'm also the author of Shattered Queen, which is a short story collection out from Falstaff a couple of years ago.
Perfect. Elisa?
Hi, I'm Elisa Hansen. I'm an author of sci-fi, fantasy, and vampire fiction. My title with Falstaff is the Immortal Journey trilogy, the first book of which is The Company of Death is currently out, and the next ones are coming. I am also a YouTuber focusing on video essays that analyze how vampire fiction and media use the vampire as metaphors for social issues and political issues, primarily focusing on feminist issues and queer theory.
Perfect. Michelle?
I'm Michelle Iannantuono. I've only got one book with John right now, and maybe ever, because we have to compete with my first love of filmmaking. But my book is Paradisa. It is about a gay ex-Navy SEAL who soul bonds to the Archangel Raphael to save the world. And it's got a lot of mythology and a lot of world religions beyond just angels in it. If you know me for my films, you might know me for Live Scream or Detroit Evolution or Seven Deadly Sins, many of which are also very queer movies in addition to my book and myself being very queer. So like many of the other panelists, it affects all aspects of my life.
All right, perfect.
Oh, me? Oh.
Yes.
Sorry, I spaced out for a moment. I am Judy Black, and I am the current series I have out with Falstaff is Shadows and Sideshows, which is all about a traveling sideshow in 1903 America that hunts monsters. And I really have had a lot of fun in that book, also toying with sexual identities and the idea of being the other, and feeling that kind of isolation while finding other people who are very similar. So I've very much enjoyed that. I also write tabletop games and modules. And one of the series that I was in has regularly got reviews for being accused of having too many lesbians in it, which is
no such thing.
Which was a great part of our marketing for that series. The Uncaged anthology. It's all female monsters getting their just desserts and kind of getting to be the stars of the show for Dungeons and Dragons 5e. But yeah, I'm super excited to be on this panel with all these awesome other people.
And finally, Michael.
I'm Michael G. Williams. Like many other authors, I sold myself to John Hartness in a bar.
And I was there, I remember.
Which I feel like is itself could potentially a very queer story, but it's not.
I did it in a Chinese restaurant.
Oh, see, there you go. We're always doing it in weird places. And I write 3 series. Well, I wrote a series that's finished, and I currently write 2 series for Falstaff Books. One of them is the one that's finished is a vampire series, an urban fantasy series about a self-declared vampire lord of North Carolina who's a gay man from the 1940s who got really tired of being told what a monster he was and decided to show the world what a monster is. And then I have a series set in the far future that's a science fiction detective novel series called A Fallen Autumn. That's the first book in that series. And that's about a guy whose genetic profile makes him very other, but it was an opportunity for me to talk about the queer experience without queerness being the problem. And I also currently write an urban fantasy series that's a time travel series set in San Francisco with lots of historical figures from San Francisco and some modern day queer witches who live in the Tenderloin.
All right, thank you. And question, I'll start with you, James, but you kind of will have slightly different. What drew you to Falstaff as an author for the Pride? Now, you helped start Falstaff, but what drew you to helping to bring the voice forward? Yes.
I've been working in publishing for a really long time now, well over a decade, as Natania and I were discussing before this panel started. And, you know, when I started, there wasn't a lot of queer representation in science fiction and fantasy. It was there, but there wasn't really anywhere that you could go and just be like, this is a story that happens to have queer people in it. It was either, hey, we're doing this as a diversity thing, or you almost have to be, you know, I'm sorry that there are queer characters in here, unless you're going to a specifically queer focused imprint or to something that is specifically focused on alternative or erotica even. And so with Falstaff, we wanted to just be like, hey, write the story. Let's find the stories that aren't being told. Let's find the really unique things, because these are the voices that haven't been getting heard. These are the weird books you can't sell anywhere else for whatever reason, either because they're not being done yet, so there's not really a market for them, or it's an author who isn't known yet, because those are the stories that we want to read. And so it comes down to a combination of, A, we wanted to be able to read those stories, so a little bit selfish, but also just making space in the industry for things that we wanted to see and using our voices and connections to make that happen.
Elisa, what drew you to Falstaff?
I've been querying my series for the Company of Death for about a year, and I'd had a couple authors, but I wasn't quite sure that they were the best place for my book. And then when I went to one of the Charlotte Writers Group meetups, I met John Hartness, and he was talking about Falstaff, and he was talking about the We Are Not This anthology that had just come out. And I was just like, oh, wow, that's so cool that you're into that. And also you happen to publish the kind of fiction I'm writing, you know, and I queried them. And the reason I've been having trouble finding a home for my book is because it's a monster mash. It's about 5 different kinds of monsters. You've got a zombie, a vampire, an android with feelings, the personification of death, and a straight white man, which is a monster of his own kind, all together on a road trip. And people would say there's too much going on in this book. It doesn't fit into any categories. Is it sci-fi? Is it fantasy? Is it humor? Is it apocalyptic? And all except for that straight white man character are queer. Like they're either pan or gay or agender or something, or trans. Like there's every single character in the book has some sort of queerness to them, which is just the way I write, because it's kind of impossible for me to not write that way. And a lot of feedback I would get on my book is, does this character have to be gay? Like he's not even a main character. He's just her friend off on the side. I get why she's gay, but why is he lamenting his dead boyfriend? It could be his dead brother. Why don't you change it to that? That would be more realistic. And I didn't want to have to make those changes. And Falstaff didn't ask for those changes. So when I was comparing like the several authors I got, Falstaff was clearly the way to go.
All right, Michelle.
Much like Elisa, I was also in the query hell for Paradisa for a while, and I never got any really specific feedback about it, with the exception of the feedback that I've always gotten about my writing that has always been said kind of like a dirty word, and that is, you write like a movie. Shocker. But I would get a lot of criticism for, you know, the voice just not being what was on trend. There's a lot of things about like third person versus first person, present tense versus past tense, a lot of stylistic things that I did not fall into the kind of like sanitized traditional publishing box for, that had an immediacy about it and a very action driven, plot driven, commercial sort of film, Fast and Furious kind of vibe to it. And it turns out that John really likes those kinds of books. And a lot of the things that Falstaff publishes are very, very like fast reads. They move along at a clip. They're very sort of fun and commercial. It's like, they're kind of like popcorn books. And I actually talked to him once about like, what if we did an anthology called like Popcorn Lit, which was all like cinematic films. And he's like, I need another anthology. Like I need a hole in my head. So no, he's like, I'm never doing it again. But it does seem to be very similar to what they publish at Falstaff, in addition to being very open to queer stories and that sort of thing.
All right, perfect. Judy, what about you?
So I have known John Hartness for 10-ish years, I think, at this point, which is kind of weird to actually think about. And I worked with a lot of other publishers and had some not so great experiences with them, both as a woman and as someone who is queer. And so I actually stopped writing and stopped publishing for a while. And John Hartness was like, dude, you're too good of a writer to not be doing this anymore. Like, just pitch me anything and, you know, we'll write up a contract, we'll make this work. Like, don't do this to yourself, sort of thing. And so that's how the Finnegan family Cabinet of Aberrations group came into existence and started happening. So it was a great chance of coming back into writing after kind of losing my way and my voice for a little bit.
Perfect. And finally, Michael.
I had been querying agents with Perishables, the first book in the Withrow Chronicles, which I guess this was probably like 10 years ago. And the feedback I got was consistently, well, this is fine, but we have no idea where a bookstore would shelve this because it's kind of horror and it's kind of not horror and it's kind of comedy and it's kind of not comedy. And he's gay and like nobody's going to know what to do with this. So good try. And I then approached some like smaller, specifically queer focused publishers whose response was, we love that this is about a queer character, but we don't do horror. And I approached a couple of smaller horror publishers and got, this is great, except he's gay. And so I was just like, fine, I'll just publish it myself. I don't care, you know, like I don't need the validation of somebody else's imprint on the spine. And then over the course of publishing that series, I just, you know, at enough conventions, met enough other people who wrote for Falstaff and spent enough time talking to John that I started to realize, oh, that's a publisher whose specialty is books that other people aren't sure how to shelve in a lot of ways. You know, he doesn't need it to be something that fits neatly into one category or like feeds exactly the same tropes as everything else that he publishes. And specifically, he was not running a publishing company that did basically gay Hunger Games every year, where like they were going to publish their one queer book and like fire the confetti cannons and say Happy Pride, and then go back to publishing the 300 straight love triangles about straight people arguing with each other. And so I said, you know what? I can publish here, and that's going to be just dandy because they're going to be people like me.
All right, perfect. And now finally, Natania.
So for me, it's kind of interesting because it ties a little bit in. I actually started, I was in the first anthology, the Strange California anthology, and then I was also in the Pride anthology. And I really came in through Jaym because we'd known each other for so long. We actually met through the Outer Alliance, which was a queer advocacy group that we had worked on in the aughts when you know, it was a little more acceptable for people to be just like incredibly in your face bigoted. And there was a lot of need for kind of connecting with other queer authors and queer readers because it really felt unsafe for a while. So it was really helpful for us in the con circuit, especially to kind of know where you could go and to feel like you had good people around you. And Jaym was someone that I had at the time was actually living in North Carolina as well. So we knew we were good people. And then I finally met John in person, and all of you know, he's an incredibly gregarious person. We're both ex-theater kids with no outlet. So, that went as you would expect. And he actually approached me and said that they were going to be doing this expanded Harkerverse. And I'd actually, kind of very similar to what Judy is talking about, I had a period of time where I'd had some success. I'd published quite a few things. I'd had kids and a lot of challenges, and writing was feeling like I would kind of have to completely change who I was as an author to get where I wanted to go. And the stories I wanted to tell were just not marketable. And John said, come up with something that you want to do. And I said, how about, like queer late Victorian monsters, lesbians, and a lesbian lamia. And he was like, sold, do that. And that became this book over here, These Marvelous Beasts, which is a trio of novellas, and really gave me kind of my groove back. I mean, I don't like to be too syrupy with John, because neither of us like to talk about our feelings, and we prefer to like smooth everything over with sarcasm and wit and charm. But truly, like I needed that grounding, and their editorial process is so good. And I've been through all of them. I've been through the big houses and the small houses, and the level of attention and the growth I had as a writer, I think, was just so essential. But also like everyone has said, there was no feedback that like these characters are too gay. You have this character who, changes this way, or this person's asexual and we're confused about that, or you're using neopronouns and we're not comfortable with that kind of thing. That's never, ever been a problem. And that's incredibly, incredibly freeing as a writer to be able to have.
Perfect. My next question, I'll start with you, Elisa, is how do you bring your own experience into your writing and onto the page?
Well, with this book, it sort of happened on its own. I didn't mean to make the protagonist have my same sexual identity. I actually started off writing her as straight because I thought I had to. I thought that's what you were supposed to do. And as I'm writing her, it just kept coming out that she's not straight. And it's not a romance, but her other protagonist, who's the embodiment of death, is genderless, is, death. And he can take any form. I use male pronouns for him, but he can present as female. He can be anything. And just the bond that they had was so queer just as a relationship. And when I started exploring her backstory, I was like, wait, she's bi. Wait, she's not just bi, she's ace. Wait, so am I, and it just kind of came out in the process. And then when I was writing the other characters in it, the vampires are all completely pansexual, because that's just my understanding of vampires. I can't envision a vampire being bound by human constraints of sexuality. And so that sort of goes without saying for me. And then the other characters are robots and zombies, which are sort of sexless creatures anyway, which kind of opens up the field to be anything. And I really wanted to play with that and explore that, to compare monstrousness and these monsters who are more human than the humans are, to also that queer experience of just having those lack of labels and boundaries.
Perfect. Michelle.
I've said before that it's basically impossible for me to write allosexual people, even when I'm trying to. I just don't understand how they think. So even my characters who are not explicitly asexual are still kind of asexual. But in Paradisa, there is a character named Clara. She's the second protagonist. Half of the book is told from her perspective. And I worked on that book for 7 years. And just throughout the process of writing it, she just never could have a love interest. Like, I just could never find anybody to kind of pair her with. She has a character that she's close with in the book, but they're just friends. She has her brother, but obviously he's her brother. And then any sort of other person, male or female, that I put in front of her was just like, no, I'm not interested. And then finally, around the time that I realized I was asexual, I was like, oh, that's what I've been doing with Clara for 7 years. She's definitely asexual as well. And so once I made that conscious decision in my revisions to really go in and dig in on that and actually name that and write that with intent, I also found that, oh, well, the goddess Athena, she's also going to be asexual, because obviously, and it sort of came from there. Even my main character Connor, who is not meant to be asexual, he is a gay man. A lot of the feedback that I got during the revision process when I was in Pitch Wars was, you're trying to build this romance between him and Raphael, but like, where's the sexual chemistry? Where's the feeling in the loins when they look at each other? And I was just like, what the hell what is she talking about? Like, this is not a thing I feel. And eventually, you know, I came to realize that I just don't think like that. And so even though those characters are not explicitly, you know, named on the page as ace, that's just how I write. And that's how my characters love each other. I really focus more on the romance. I don't really focus on sexual chemistry in my characters and any characters that I write, because it's just so foreign to me. So yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest thing that informs my characters. Although the other thing is that the queer spirit of found family and that queers flock together is also a big one.
All right, Judy.
So yeah, I've been thinking while everyone has been talking, and what for me is that sticks out the most is when I was writing the Finnegan family series, is the main character, and that is just angry, which is not usually like me at all for most people who know me, but it was this anger at what was going on in the world at the time, at the expectations of, you know, a woman of a certain age should be getting married, should be having children, should be in relationships, all of these kind of expectations, and compounding that by setting it in 1903 as well. And it was just this very cathartic and really great way of having a character who was just angry and able to kind of lash out in a way I think some of us want to sometimes, in a world that has all these heavy expectations and rules and roles you don't want to play, you don't want to do, that kind of just feel very constricting at times. And so for me, that was a surprising experience to realize that I was kind of angry at these expectations that, oh, well, you're going to be in a heterosexual relationship and you're going to have your 2.5 kids. And, you know, what do you mean that you don't like people in dating? What is that? That's not a thing. You know, like all of these expectations just kind of, and being able to write a character who's just like, no, screw you, I'm going to go stab this monster. Was really fun and really nice.
Perfect. Michael.
Well, much like Michelle, I am not capable of writing non-queer characters. Gosh, the times I've tried, wow, they came out real fast, because that's just not a set of experiences that I'll ever understand. But, you know, so the thing that comes to mind for this is that, like, when I was writing A Fallen Autumn, the deal in A Fallen Autumn is that the main character is what's called an artisanal humanoid, meaning that his parents made him the old-fashioned way because they were just too dumb to know better. And that sort of puts him in a special class in his society where he's not really supposed to participate in like the larger society. He's supposed to have gone and lived on the reservation and, you know, not had done things like have a job and live in the city and stuff like that. And there are people in that culture who like look at him as sort of amazingly ideal. And there are people who look at him as this sort of really embarrassing throwback. And I wrote that specifically because I wanted to talk about what I think the queer experience is right now, of being in this very strange place of being sort of simultaneously fetishized and reviled. You know, we live in a time when we're not even halfway through the year, and there have been more anti-queer and specifically anti-trans bills proposed in state legislatures nationwide than any year previously. And RuPaul's Drag Race just won a bunch of awards and award shows, and straight people go to sports bars to watch RuPaul's Drag Race finales. Like, what a weird time to be a queer person. And at the same time, the queer communities ourselves are learning a lot about ourselves that, like, those of us who are like me, who are just like these white cis gays who are men, especially, we didn't know a lot about the other queer identities in the queer communities. We kind of thought we were it for a long time because we're really privileged compared to everybody else in the queer communities. And so, like, we're also needing to learn about the other people in the queer communities at the same time that we are constantly, all of us in the queer communities, encountering these preconceived notions, good and bad, where, Natania mentioned that like people used to be really a lot more open with their prejudice. And in some ways, they're just as open now with their prejudice. It's just that sometimes those prejudices are this weird idealization, and I really wanted to try to talk about that in that book. And then in my San Francisco series, I wanted to talk about like queer spaces being threatened by virtue of people just deciding we don't need them anymore. That idea that like we've advanced past the point of needing to have our own neighborhoods and things like that. And maybe that's true for a lot of people. I don't know, but queer spaces are really precious to me. And I wanted to make sure that I talked about the idea of like queer home, that concept that got brought up of like queer found family and the fact that we flock together. I think all of my writing tries to reflect that in some way, because it's all about people who have been through some sort of transformative shift in their identity. They became a vampire, they, whatever. They ran away from the res and they went to live in the city and became a hustler, things like that. Those are all experiences that every queer person has had who's ever come to some better understanding of who they are. And they're all characters who have had to go finding people who would understand them and respect them for that.
Thank you. Natania.
Yeah, I echo a lot of what Michael's saying. That definitely resonates with me. I think there a lot of it too for me in my writing. There's a lot of sort of pushing through and transformation, because that is such a part, I think, for me personally, having religious trauma in my upbringing, not just my own queerness being. I mean, I joke, I really didn't know that bisexuality was a thing until I was in college. I was just taught that there were the gays and there were the straights, and that's all that there was. There was nothing in between. And so I was just confused for a very long time. And it took me a really long time, even though I was an advocate in the community. I also figured I married so young, I disqualified myself. Like I'm done. I married a man. I can't work anymore. But the longer that I sort of sat with that, the longer I was miserable, because I just felt that wasn't who I truly was as a person. And I was, of course, writing the queerest stuff ever. My first book, Pilgrim of the Sky, is incredibly sapphic, and among other things. And that's just something that I find fascinating. And I definitely err toward the side of romance. I'm actually kind of transitioning into more of a queer romance writer. And one of the things that I think I feel so passionate about it is because I'm actually demisexual, which was kind of an interesting realization on my part, because again, terminology can be so confusing. I was like, but I have a fine libido, like it's not an issue with that. But then I kind of realized, but it takes me a long time to get there. Like I objectively understand people are attractive, but the idea of actually crossing physical space with someone is like a whole other story. And so like my characters have a lot of that intellectual connection, I'm a Gemini, I can't help it. But in romance, that's actually a genre where that is so encouraged, and characters have these long courting rituals almost, where you really get to know each other over pages and pages. And I always felt like I just didn't see romance in the stories that I wanted. I didn't see the innocent and beautiful and just, in some ways kind of boring queer stories. Yeah, I remember when I watched Steven Universe with my kids and listening to Rebecca Sugar talk about, that's why they wanted to write this story as well. They wanted to write a story that was innocent and sweet about, queer characters. And there aren't, kids get it. My kids absolutely get it. And that makes me so hopeful. I never had to come out to my kids. My kids never had to come out to me. We've just had this open conversation that gender, sexuality, sexual attraction, all of these things are your decision. They can change over time. I didn't have language like they did. My daughter is like, I'm she, they. I'm like, I am too. And that makes sense to me and it makes sense to her. And, I think having fiction that lets us play with those things is incredibly freeing. While on one hand, I've written some really cerebral kind of stuff, but I think for me, what's been just wonderful is just writing the stories that I would have loved. I recently just wrote a book that's basically Pride and Prejudice with lesbian witches. And it's just, it's not rewriting the world, but it was such a joy to write. And I was just so thrilled to be writing that kind of story. And yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at this time.
All right, perfect. Jaym.
So a lot of it, actually, it's a little off topic maybe, but what Natania said made me think of it. So I took part in, I think it was Cascade Writers Workshop a few years ago, and I was doing critiques there. And one of the things that I noticed in a lot of the samples was how many teenagers or even younger kids there were who are openly queer within the stories. And I commented on it to a couple of the people who were writing, who are largely, middle-aged mothers. And they're like, yeah, my kids, that's just what they are. They have trans friends, they have queer friends, and that's just a thing. And I was like, because I grew up much like Natania, where I didn't know bi was a thing, let alone something like genderqueer, until I was in college. Like, I originally, when I came out, thought I was lesbian because I liked women. So that, it's one or the other. I was really confused for a while there. But to listen to these people talking about their kids and the ease and openness and just the opportunity that they have, it was just like this light bulb of like, every single thing that I have had to deal with all of these years has been worth it, because that's the next generation is going to get to read about that. They're going to see these characters in their stories, and anything I can do to help make that more common is really, really important to me. So, I'm not writing a lot these days. It's something that I just have not put a lot of time into with other things that I have going on. But as an editor, it's something that I really look for and I really strive for, is to find those opportunities for people to tell those stories that are starting to really get some headway.
That's perfect. That actually leads into my next question, which I will start with you, Michelle. What do you want people with other identities to take away from your writing that they may not otherwise know about your experience?
Oh, about my experience personally.
or the overall
the queer
experience.
experience.
Yes.
Wow. So one thing that's absolutely important is putting a name on things and showing people that, stuff can exist. As has been already mentioned, I'm not old enough to where I didn't know what bi was when I was growing up. We had gay, straight, and bi when I was growing up, but we didn't have ace, we didn't have non-binary, I didn't have any trans friends until I was like 25, or openly trans friends until I was 25. And so had I seen a character that was asexual or demisexual or non-binary, or, these sorts of characters in the media that I had consumed growing up, it's interesting to think about how much earlier I would have come to my own identities. I was like Natania, I've been with my current spouse since I was 18. We got married at 25, but I'm 29. We've been together since I was 18. So I also kind of felt like, well, I've turned in my my card or whatever. And then my spouse came out as non-binary at 30. So I kind of, like attracted, like still. We just didn't, but we didn't know. When we got together, we were two cis, straight, heteronormative people, and now we're just two very queer, gender non-conforming asexuals. So yeah, I think that media has a transformative power of being able to show you a variety of lived experience. I think with asexuality specifically, one thing that is a little frustrating about asexual rep in media is that there's so little of it right now that people kind of see it as a monolith. That, they see Todd on BoJack Horseman and they're like, this is a guy who doesn't want to date people, or doesn't, he wants to date people, but he doesn't want to have sex at all. He has no libido at all. And that's what asexuality is. And it's like, well, that's actually not quite true. It's a spectrum. Some aces, like to have sex, but they just don't feel the attraction. Some gray aces aces can feel it, you know, depending upon the person, just very rarely. There's a whole spectrum there. And by continuing to write characters like that, you can add to the spectrum of experience. And so one day a reader might open a book and say, oh, I didn't think I was ace because I thought this was what ace was, but this character says they're ace and they're like me. And so that helps me learn about myself.
Perfect. Judy.
So I try to write everything that I put out with one intended audience, and that's 16-year-old me. You know, I decide that I'm going to write the books that I needed when I was 16 years old. And so, yeah, having the vocabulary and the words to say, because I think a lot of, for ace people in particular, I think there's a lot of the idea of broken or can be fixed, or if there is a portrayal in media, it's an alien, it's a robot, it's something that is not human. You know, I got into arguments in my grad school programs about if sex is what makes something human or not, which was a wild conversation to be having in the first place. But this whole idea of being broken or wrong, or, you know, you just haven't met the right person yet, is my personal fave. But yeah, so that's, I hope that anybody who is out there that is like 16-year-old me and maybe is not sure what's going on, like, why am I not doing all the same things all my friends are doing? Why do I not understand what they're talking about? What's this deal with this movie where they're like, oh, it's my one true love and I have to be with them immediately and instantly? And I'm like, but you. So so I think for me, it would just be that you're not broken. It's okay. And it's also totally okay if you change as you grow up. Like, you are not beholden to the one thing. Like, it's not like the one ring. Like, you can change and adjust as you get older and as you meet new people and have new experiences and learn. So I think if anything, I would want people to take from my books to like keep reading and keep learning and keep exploring things that you don't know about. Because yeah, like there's so many terms and understandings of what people want and are that I don't know that we'll ever have a full grasp on it, but it's fun to read about.
Michael.
I think if I want non-queer people to, although I think that's a pretty narrow slice of the population, frankly, but I think that if I want non-queer people to take anything from what I write, it's first, well, it's two things because I like to talk. First, it's that queerness is not tragic. There's nothing tragic about queer identities. It's not automatically a bad thing. It's not automatically a burden. Some of us were awfully relieved, you know, thank you very much. The other thing I think I want them to take is that queer lives take many different forms. There are many different ways. There are as many different ways to be queer as there are queer people. And there's like not a set script for any one queer identity. There's not a set of curbs on each side of the lane or anything like that. That said, no matter what form queer life takes, it almost always has the potential, and in this way, I kind of want to dunk on the non-queer people. It almost always has the potential to be happier and better because we've had to think about what we want. We've had to think about what our life is going to be. We've had to make some choices about whether or not to live up to who we are or to hide from who we are. And there are lots of us who might be in the closet about whatever our identity is, for whom that is not a joyful thing. Hopefully, the end of that sentence is it's not yet a joyful thing. It's not a joyful thing yet. But I think that queerness has the potential to be like so enriching just by virtue of challenging queer people to consider what it is we want in life and the people that we want in our lives and the relationships that we do or don't want in our lives. And I think that's a big part of why I want them to understand that it's not tragic.
Natania.
Yeah, that definitely resonates a lot with me, Michael. I feel like this is a good BarCon conversation soon to be had when we can all see each other in person someday. But I agree too with Michelle. I think for me that this idea is that it is your journey. You know, I think queerness for me is also very parallel to my own neurodivergence. I was diagnosed with ADHD at almost 40. And looking back at my life and my personality and my struggles and my queerness and how all of these things are so intertwined, and it has been, like you're saying, Michael, it is constant observation. It is constant. I have this need to be real to myself, and I was born with that. And it is actually painful for me to be who I am not. And one of the ways that I compared it, actually, I was talking about how I kind of sort of coming around to being genderqueer, is that, I grew up in the 90s. While everyone was listening to Pearl Jam and going to concerts, I was listening to the Beatles, and I listened to the Beatles for like all of the 90s. So I lived through the 90s, just like I'm a woman. I was born a woman's body. I don't feel just like that. My body is not mine. It's never been a problem. I've had children. I've had these experiences, but I wasn't listening to Pearl Jam. I don't have these core moments. And it's like, I'm a woman asterisk, and it was like this feeling of relief to see that about myself. And what was cool is that it came out of conversations with my 8-year-old daughter, who feels that way too. She's like, I don't feel like I'm just a girl. And I said, well, let's talk about this. What does this mean to you? And it's like, how on earth are we living in a world where my 8-year-old is like schooling me about, this kind of stuff? But that's so incredible. And I hope that in my stories, people see that journey, that it is not, you don't put it in the oven and it comes out and it's all done. And that people challenge us, and that our found families, if we get them, and most of us, I think, if we seek them out, are lucky enough to find them, they can challenge us and nurture us and support us, and letting go of the garbage that drags us down. Because whether it's trauma or it's, the residual self-hatred, all the stuff that really, many of us older queers have had to deal with from such a young age. I tell this story a lot, but I remember in high school, we had this anonymous question bucket in a health class. You could ask any question. And I was really questioning my sexuality. I was so confused, and I wrote down, what, is it normal to question your sexuality? And our health teacher, of course, first question, pulls it out, reads it out loud, and laughs and goes, well, that's pretty self-explanatory, and goes to the next question. And I was like, it's not, because clearly it's not. But yeah, I do hope that, we see these journeys, and that we see people. I've been so amazed through TikTok and social media and Instagram, watching people have these journeys, and there's trans journeys, and there's there and back again journeys, and there is no one right story. And so what we're able to do as writers is kind of crystallize that in a moment and get that emotion. And that's a really powerful thing for us to be able to do. So that's kind of what I hope we can provide for readers moving forward.
And Jaym.
To find the unmute button there. A couple of things for me. I think the first one for non-queer people specifically is that queer content should not be a separate thing. It shouldn't be a category. And this is one of the things that really frustrates me about, some of the things like Netflix, we'll use as an example. Yay, there's a queer section. It's really great to see our representation there. But then you look at the stories, and a lot of them, it's like, this is a normal show that happens to have a queer character in it. And that people are writing it off because there's a queer character in it. So clearly it's not for me. And I'm hoping that as we see more representation, that this becomes something that it's not a queer story. It's a story that has queer characters in it. And that's something that I've been fighting for a while, and that I think we're starting to get there. But we also, for queer folks, we need to be happy for that to happen as well. And we need to start letting that happen. I've gotten pushback from people who say, this is not explicitly called out as a queer story. And it's like, no, because we're just part of life. We're part of society. We exist in huge numbers. I do not need to say this is a queer story because it has a queer person in it. So that's one of my big things, is normalizing it. I don't want to be exceptional. I want to just be normal and part of society in my own way. I think the other thing is a little more for kids who maybe are queer or who want to support someone who is. And it echoes something that several other people have said. It's a journey. I have never been super happy with my gender, but I tried to force it into a box for a while. And then I was like, well, I'm not super happy as a girl. Maybe I'm trans. And then I was like, I don't like gender. I don't want it. I don't want to deal with it. And so it's, I joke that that's my gender now, is just leave me alone. I don't want to deal with it. And it's okay to make your own box, even if people are trying to make you put a label on it, especially as we move forward. We're going to start moving away from there being labels for things and being, this is just who I am and what I like. And I think that that's a really good thing. And the more that we talk about it and that we discuss who we are, the better it's going to be for everyone involved, even people who maybe didn't know that they were queer until they heard someone else talking about it.
All right, perfect. Elisa.
I guess the same thing with my story. I didn't write it as a queer story. It's just that to me, monsters are kind of inherently queer. They straddle the in-between, especially monsters with feelings. And it just kind of came out that way. And it's not a romance. There's no real relationships other than this sort of like buddy road trip camaraderie that grows out of it. But as far as gender goes, the idea is basically that gender is all in your head or your soul or your consciousness. And your meat suit doesn't matter, because these characters will go through these transformations where their bodies will be changed beyond their imagining, and it's not the body that they thought they had before, yet they're still themselves. Or you have this one character who's an android and she has a female body, she uses female pronouns. But why is she that way? Because someone built her that way. Is she really female? What does that even really mean? And she has just as much consciousness and personality in this universe as the humans do. And also that there's different ways to form relationships, even romantic relationships, that not every romantic or partnership relationship, sort of like, a couple or like a polycule, has to fit that Hollywood format of like, this is what a monogamous relationship looks like, or this is what love looks like. Even if it's queer love, you still have very sort of strict like marriage, normalcy, cohabitation, but there's different ways to form relationships and love each other, and just normalizing that, and not even as like a message or an issue book or anything, but just having it on the page and just letting it exist and letting people read it and say, oh, maybe I can identify with that. Or even if I can't, if I see someone else living that lifestyle, maybe I understand it a little bit better.
All right, perfect. So my next question, and I'll start with you, Judy, is do you have anything you're working on, new, recent, upcoming?
Button hit itself. So I am working on a super ridiculous, cutesy, cozy paranormal mystery that will be published by Falstaff. And it is just been an absolute pleasure to write and to work on, because it is just, it's a little bit of levity and fun in a time when I feel like everybody's kind of like this all the time. At least maybe that's just me. And I also am working on several little Dungeons and Dragons modules, because I like coming up with little non-playable characters for people to add in their games and to make them unexpected. Sort of what you were talking about with monsters. I particularly like to take some of the character types that are usually portrayed as a villain of some sort, and making those like your friendly potion person and those sorts of things, and adding in, extra lesbians, just so I can continue to live up to that review, a little bit of that kind of stuff. So I'm having a lot of fun just writing fun, happy stuff. Like, I'm entertaining myself, and that's been super fun because I'm easily entertained.
All right, perfect. Michael.
I just turned in the third book in Servant Sovereign, the modern day time travel San Francisco urban fantasy that starts with Through the Doors of Oblivion, in which modern day queer witches have summoned up the spirit of Emperor Norton, who was a real historical figure, and they and Emperor Norton are fighting a demon of greed who's running a real estate scam via Airbnb, basically. So that's really fun. I just turned in the third book in that, and then I'm going to write the fourth book, which will finish out the first volume of that series. It'll at least finish that story, and then we'll see if there's more. And I also am currently working on the sequel to A Fallen Autumn, which I wrote and was finished, and I turned it in on the 4th of January, and it ends in a character inciting an armed rebellion, to insurrection. So then I had to write to John and say, we can't publish this book because I think I accidentally wrote a QAnon screed. And then I did a little more research and realized I had, and it was totally accidental. And so we said, no, we can't publish that. So now I'm refixing that book so that it's not about that. And eventually that'll get published. And that's what I'm working on right now.
All right, perfect. Natania.
Sure. So this summer, the sequel to this book, which was my first novel, called God's Splendinium, will be out from Falstaff Books. And I've been working on that for almost 10 years. So I'm very excited. And it is a big queer epic fantasy. It's a sort of Regency myth punk. So the godling of the sea and the godling of sort of a deity of Apollo, a love story that includes the romantic poets, and a long labor of my heart. So I'm very excited to see that finally come to fruition. Big honkin' book. So if you want a big thick boy, this is that book. But and then what was kind of cool is that I mentioned the book that I wrote earlier. It's called Netherford Hall, and it's actually the book, the queer romance book that I finally got an agent with. So after years and years of trying to put myself in boxes, I finally just said, you know what? I wrote a queer Bridgerton with witches, so I'm just gonna go out there and just do it. And if it doesn't work this time, then I'll figure something out. So it's been a really interesting experience. I just finished my second pass on edits, and then it should be going to do the whole gamut of stuff, which I haven't done in a very long time. But I'm hoping that will continue, because I could write in that world forever. I mean, there's something about manners and witches and sapphic love that just absolutely goes together so beautifully. And it has a male romance sub story too, because I couldn't not. And there's asexual characters, and there's so it's I do feel like it's a good time. I'm seeing a lot of good movement for a lot of folks, and I'm hoping that continues to be the case as well. So that's me.
All right, Jaym.
I have a couple of things. So it's been a bit of time in coming, but I'm doing an RPG actually through Gallant Knight Games called We Are All Monsters, and the QAnon screen made me laugh because we wrote it a couple of years ago, and I went back to do the final edit on it, and we had some 5G stuff in there as a joke. And I messaged the author, and I was like, we need to rewrite this and find a different joke to use in here, because this isn't funny anymore. But it's all about found families and pushing back against, things like a lot of the corporate stuff going on, a lot of the environmental destruction. It's extremely queer and found family. It's written entirely by women and queer folks and non-binary. So I am super, super excited about that. And that is in the final process right now. Galen Dara is doing the art, because when you find a good thing, stick with them. And then personally, I'm starting to work on my own stuff a little bit again after a lot of years of editing. So I have a project that I'm trying to write that is basically a mythology of two women dealing with eldritch horrors in a fantasy world. And one of them is older and dealing with being a warrior nearing the end of her life. The other is dealing with having returned from the dead. So we'll see where that goes.
All right. Elisa?
I am working on the next two books in the Immortal Journey series for Falstaff, books 2 and 3 to Company of Death, which is a story about the Grim Reaper losing his powers during the zombie/vampire apocalypse, because when everyone in the world is undying, there's no one left to die. And yet death is the key to life. So he joins up with the last person who he almost took her life, who became a zombie instead. And together they have to walk or somehow cross the country from California to New York to save the world before the horsemen of the apocalypse can destroy it, during a zombie apocalypse, with a vampire, a robot, and a human friend. And besides that, I have also spent the last year writing a very gay vampire romance novel.
All right. And Michelle.
John Hartness and I kind of have a running joke about when he's going to get sequels to Paradisa, because I need no more projects right now. I'm a little swamped with film work. But in the film side, I have definitely been still going all in on a lot of queer projects. I just wrapped my eighth directorial effort, Femme Fatale, which is a short film that was written and starring my friend Michael James Daly about his experiences as a 43-year-old gay actor trying to make it in Hollywood. And it's a horror comedy, so it takes a horror comedy turn and also lampoons horror conventions and some other things like that. John was actually present when we shot that at Atomicon a couple weeks ago. I told him not to alert anybody if he heard screaming. And then my other big, I guess, writing project this year is going to be the screenplay for the sequel to Live Scream. That was my first feature, and Live Screamers is an ensemble that expands the universe a little bit, has a very diverse cast, talks a lot about marginalization and peer pressure and capitalist systems in the streaming and gaming sphere and the content creation sphere. So also a horror. I can't make movies without murdering at least a couple people at this point. But that makes the movies fun. So, and one day I'll maybe have a sequel to Paradisa. I have 30,000 words in, and I have an outline for a trilogy. I would like to actually finish that. But Paradisa does stand alone as a solo novel. So no weird cliffhangers or anything if you do decide to check it out.
All right. And so before we leave, let's go around and have everyone tell the audience where they can find you on the web. And I'll start with you, Michael.
You can find me at www.michaelgwilliamsbooks.com. There are links there to all of my social media stuff. But if you want to hear me be loudly political and also just like retweet a bunch of stuff, then you can find me as at McManlyPants on Twitter.
All right. Natania.
So I too shout into the void at Twitter most of the time. I'm at Natania Barron there, and sometimes Michael and I get into some good conversations as well. I'm there every Monday. I do something called Thread Talk, which is about the history of fashion and colonialism, and sometimes queer history as well. So you can always find me there. I'm also on TikTok at Natania Books, and then nataniabarron.com has everything else.
All right, perfect. Jaym.
So you can find me at jaymgates.com, but I wouldn't suggest it right now because WordPress did an update right in the middle of updates, and now I can't actually access my dashboard to change things because they broke themselves. So I'm going to be moving to a new situation soon, but for now it's a little ragged. I'm much better to be found on Twitter as at Jaym Gates. Currently I have been more active there lately. So one of these days I'll actually remember to start doing TikTok stuff, but that day is not yet today.
Elisa.
You can find me at elisahansen.com or on Twitter at ElisaInTime, or mostly on YouTube. And my YouTube channel is called Maven of the Eventide. But if that's too hard to remember, just look up vampire reviews. I'm the first thing that comes up. Besides my video essays about vampire fiction, I also host a monthly vampire book club on YouTube. If you like to read vampire books, we have a live stream every month where we read a vampire book together and then discuss it live with the chat, which I also host through my Discord. And the link to my Discord is in the description of every single one of my videos. Very easy to find. There's about 600 people in the Discord, but we're a very chill Discord, and we just talk about vampire books and books in general.
All right, perfect. Michelle.
On Twitter, I am Lady Tuono, Tuono, like my name, where I also yell about politics and things. On Instagram, I'm Octopunk Media. I'm pretty much Octopunk Media everywhere. That's my film handle. And on Twitch, every Monday I do at twitch.tv/Octopunk Media. Every Monday I do Octopunk Weekly Update, which goes into like whatever new is going on with me in production. And I'm about to start every Saturday alternating and bringing back two shows. One's Ships and Giggles, which is our fandom improv comedy stream show. show that we do. And the other one's Breakout Roles, which is tabletop RPGs that are usually queer, indie, and played by actors.
Right. And finally, Judy.
So you can find me at judyblackcloud.com, and I am Judy Blackcloud on pretty much all of the social media sites. I am currently not as active on them because I'm trying to limit some of my social media time because it is an all-consuming time vortex of which I am very weak to escape. I will feed you in a minute, Kat. But yeah, so I'm pretty much Judy Blackcloud on everything. I'm probably most active somewhere between Twitter and Instagram and just meandering the internet.
All right. I want to thank all of you for joining me today and everyone for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.